Hey, there we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it might be where you are out there. Welcome back to the live stream. My name is Jeff Fritz, and this is C# with CSharpFritz. This is our beginner-friendly stream where we're answering your questions. We're talking about topics to get you started, get you out there and ready to go with .NET, with C#. And this month we're talking about ASP.NET. How's it going there, chat room? Good to see you. Let me take a look over there at what's going on. Hello, hello. Veronica Hex is here. Lycan1534. Josiah PL is here. Hello, hello. Flot, good to see you. Mr. Joe B, back for another session. Yes, indeed. We had some time off there. There was a national holiday here in the States. I had some work being done here at the house. Glad to be back and talking. Robert Dino, good to see you. Jason Farrell is here. Charles Galuli, good morning, good morning. Shy Sharp, how's it going? Austin, first time watching live, welcome. So good to see you. Got a little bit of coffee on board here, feeling good. And today we're gonna talk about OpenAPI and gRPC. This is a beginner-friendly stream. We're not gonna go deep on any advanced topics. We're not gonna go into advanced ways to interact and call different services. We're not going to work with any sample services out there. We're going to specifically focus on working with the templates, learning how to use the templates, build our own sample service and how we can interact with that and generate clients. And that's the big reason that you choose these two technologies, is to generate client application code that adheres directly to the way that you want your service to work. Now, that's actually a pretty good idea. When you think about it, when you're building a service, something that you expect machine-to-machine communication, you're going to define some sort of an API surface, some sort of a definition as to how I want my code interacted with. Well, you don't want folks deviating from that. When you're able to generate an API document that then folks can use to generate their client code from, now we're all talking the same language. Now we've all got the exact same way that we can interact with our code. How's it going there? M. Pulowski, .NET Know-How, good to see you. So we have some other previously built client reference stuff, service reference stuff that was available in older technologies, and OpenAPI, gRPC, these are technologies that have been built, that folks have been working on, that are out there and maintained by the open source community, by folks that aren't Microsoft, that we think are pretty good, and a lot of people are using, a lot of people are growing with, and finding great success. So let me get some music playing here in the background. This is Stream Beats from our friend Harris Heller. I'm going to play the Lo-Fi playlist today. We get that tuned in. So this is groovy music that's easy listening, great to have in the background as we're writing code together. Make sure you check it out. Stream Beats from Harris Heller. This is royalty free for anybody to use on their YouTube videos, Twitch, whatever type of content you might be producing. You are welcome to use Stream Beats in the background, royalty free. Thank you so much, Harris. We appreciate you letting us use your music as we write some code together here today. So let me head over to the GitHub repository. Of course, we have a GitHub repository we've been using to keep track, and it shows all the samples we've been working through here on stream. Let me head over to the code. We can take a look at that and start discussing not just what we're going to be doing today, but what's coming up in the weeks ahead, because we're approaching February here, and I want to show you we're going to get through February, and in March we're going to move into talking about Blazor. We're going to get into our first user interface framework. We've learned how to build websites, how to use Razor with whether it's MVC or Razor Pages to build websites that render on the server using ASP.NET Core. We're going to learn how to build with Blazor and either render on the server or on the client. So stay tuned when we get into March for that. All of the source code, all of the samples are here. There's some documentation here. I need to tune and update some of the documentation for some of our sessions. But there's notebooks, Jupyter notebooks, for all of the basic C# sessions that we've had here on stream. And looking forward, there are also, under the projects tab over here, definitions as to what we're going to be doing for our ASP.NET shows. So you can see we're in progress. We're going to be doing the OpenAPI gRPC session today. SignalR is up next. We'll talk about ASP.NET security after that. We had some requests for us to talk about background hosted services and cores. Cross-origin resource sharing. That's what cores is. Those two topics I'm looking at, maybe we bundle them together as a bit of an errata show that we'll have as we get to the end of the ASP.NET sessions that we're going to have here together. But I think those are the remaining topics that I'm looking at. So 3 more shows after this one only gets me halfway into February. I'm not sure about 1 or 2 more sessions after that. I'm leaving it open for, right, do we need 1 or 2 more? Is there a deployed to Azure, working with and using ASP.NET Core with Azure session in there? Building microservices with Docker and Kubernetes. Maybe there's something in there. Kubernetes and Thai. I think, you know what, I think that's what we need to get into. Austin asks, let me put that up. Let me put that message up that you have there. There we go. I have a couple things here floating around in the background. Austin asks, will I talk about HangFire? That's not a bad idea to talk about when we get to background hosted services here. Let me jump into this one. So, yeah, let's cover HangFire and right, iHosted service is really where I want to make sure we go with this. But HangFire is definitely a technology that we can bring up at the time when we're discussing this. But HangFire is a service mechanism, is a service series of APIs that you can use in the background as you're building web applications. So definitely something to discuss. iHosted service is the interface that comes with ASP.NET Core that you can use as well. So I think there's definitely something that we can do there. So let's talk about microservices and Docker and Kubernetes. I think that's one of those architecture types of discussions that folks are usually interested in, and we should probably touch on that as we're going through the wrap up here with ASP.NET Core. And the last one that I think makes sense for us to do is Project Thai should also be on the docket here. So these are topics that once you build a service, it starts to get a little bit more interesting because you want services to talk to each other. And when folks request and interact with your application, you're now going to delegate requests from your website to various services that are going to interact, perform different tasks for you. Project Thai and Kubernetes are ways for you to tie those together with a technique called orchestration, so that your requests are delegated appropriately and those services start and stop and scale as needed depending on workload of your system. The last one that I want to cover here, of course, is going to be deploy ASP.NET Core to Azure. Need to make sure that we cover, great, once you've built all of this, I want to put it somewhere. Well, let's make sure we cover how to get that into Microsoft Azure. because everybody likes the big blue cloud, and we want to make sure that you can get in and use that effectively with all of the cool ASP.NET technology that we've learned. So there we go. So I think these two, yeah, like I said, will be pulled together as an errata show before we get into microservices and deploy. Or maybe we pull this one up here and then deploy to Azure, and we wrap these two up at the end. So you can keep an eye here. This is what will be coming up next, and I'll set up a project and start plotting out what we're going to be doing for our Blazor sessions that we're going to do starting in March, probably March and April. We'll be talking about Blazor here in this series, and you'll find them over on the YouTube channel as well. So, how's it going there, class? Good to see you. Hey there, Thindall. Welcome. So let's talk about. And I've been putting the content, the samples, down here in these sessions folders. After we finish today, I'll have 0205 out here. You'll see for today's session, the 5th episode in the ASP.NET Core series. So, OpenAPI and gRPC, what are these things, right? And I mentioned OpenAPI is this technology that we can use, and I've actually already got this open over here in Visual Studio. So let me close all these. OpenAPI is this technology that we get by default when we generate an ASP.NET Core Web API. The default template comes with this technology. So according to rapidapi.com, I wrote notes for this, check this out. The specification, the OpenAPI specification, it's an open source format and initiative for designing and creating machine-readable interface files that you can use to produce, describe, consume, and visualize your RESTful APIs. Your APIs that you're going to use to communicate between servers, or maybe from a client to a server, so that you can interact and execute methods on a server, or you're going to fetch data from the server so you can work with it on the client. That interaction where you want to do something with a server, let the cloud go and do something for you. Let a virtual machine, a Docker container, let that do the work for you, and let your client receive the benefits, receive the output of that interaction. So this way, with OpenAPI, we have a standard format for it. And we've already seen how we can build API controllers like this in ASP.NET Core. We inherit from controller base or from controller, but controller base is the minimum you need for building an API. We've added the API controller attribute on the top there on line 10, right there. We've defined a route that this will be listening on. It's whatever the name of the class before the keyword controller is. So this is going to listen on weather forecast. And it provides a single method here, get, that listens to the HTTP GET verb. Effectively the same as when you browse somewhere with your web browser. It'll execute this code and return an array, an enumerable collection of weather forecasts. Pretty simple. But what OpenAPI puts on top of this is the definition of what this looks like for machines and for other folks to be able to consume. So while I have a weather forecast object here and this very simple API that receives a logger and it doesn't do much, right? It's just generating some fake weather forecast data. In my startup class over here, when I scroll down, there is information about generating Swagger here, it says, and Swagger UI. Well, what's Swagger? I thought we were working with OpenAPI. So Swagger was the original name for this definition, for this specification. Swagger is also a company, is an organization that builds tools for building APIs, managing APIs, and interacting with them. So they donated the specification to the Linux Foundation, and it was renamed to OpenAPI, and it was given a little bit more OpenAPI definition, right? Things were renamed a little bit, and it became OpenAPI. But for our purposes, the Swagger tools that are here work with OpenAPI the exact same way. A lot of folks will use the terms Swagger and OpenAPI interchangeably. It's not exactly accurate, but for the purposes of these APIs, so you're not going and changing things, we are generating Swagger documentation. We are generating a user interface that's based off of the Swagger tools. So this is what's going on here. So the lines I have highlighted there on line 31, 32, and 33 add Swagger API generation into our project. And it generates version 1 here with a little bit of API information. The title, and this title by default comes from the name of our project. And this project is called One Template. This is the default template you get. So I named it one_template because this is the first sample we're looking at today. And it's version V1. I put, right, V1 is put there on the version number. That can be any string, but it's required so we can identify what that is. And you're gonna see we're gonna blow this out. We're gonna make this a lot more interesting in a little bit here. Down here, when we're in development mode, right? So when we're running on our development server, by default, it makes Swagger available and adds the Swagger user interface. If you want this to be available all the time, you can move it out of there and put it down here in these lower sections. So, a lot of folks don't like to make the Swagger user interface always available in production, but they do want to make the Swagger interactions available. So you could move app use Swagger down here into the lower section so that those interactions are available. Why do I need yellow glasses to write the code? These are blue blocker glasses, and they help with eye strain that I have looking at screen for many hours during the day. So it just helps me in how I read and interact with my workstation here. So, but this add Swagger user interface makes a very nice user interface available. We saw a little bit of this last time, and I'm going to start this instance. I don't want to use IIS Express. Give me just the Kestrel instance, and we'll take a look at this, at the user interface that this generates for us, and step into adding more definition, adding more capabilities to the user interface so that it becomes a little bit more interesting for those folks that are going to interact with our project. So here's weather forecast, right? That simple one method, get weather forecast. It defines a schema here that has, well, here's what's in that weather forecast object. And you'll see these are not quite .NET data types. It's not quite a date time for the date, right? It's date dash time that's been converted to a string. It's an integer that's 32 bits. The temperature in Fahrenheit is read-only, and the summary is a string, and it's not required that we have that. When I click get here, it gives us just a little bit of information, the media types that are available for interacting with this. So I can send plain text, JSON in application JSON or text JSON format. And I can even try that out and get my little bit of information responded to me in JSON format. Okay, that's fine. And you see the dates. It looks like a date, but it's in string format. All right, so this isn't too bad. I get it. I can download, copy to a clipboard some of this data if I need to work with it. I can see the headers and exactly what those interactions were. So, this isn't too bad. But I mean, there are all kinds of complex things that I would want to do with my APIs that I want to grow and provide more information here. Great example. My temperature in Fahrenheit here is listed as read-only true. Well, why is that read-only on Fahrenheit? Maybe I'd like to add some documentation around that, right? Or write the summary. Maybe I want to provide some descriptive information around that. Or I've got some complex schema for all of the objects and how they work together. I want to be able to define some of that information and provide additional documentation about that to the folks that are going to be interacting with my API. This becomes a very nice documentation user interface. It also provides a link to that document, that API document, that folks can use to generate clients. And we'll see about how to generate clients with the next demo. But very simple JSON format here that folks, any machine, any programming language can pick up and turn into code for working with this API. That's not bad. Well, I can make heads and tails of that. No, we haven't gotten into gRPC yet. Just got started talking about OpenAPI. So the user interface is nice. I've got a bit of documentation here, but I want to do more, right? I want to be able to tell folks, well, here's who to contact for help with this API. I don't like having the branding up here. Smart Bear is the name of the company that owns Swagger. I'd like to remove that and make this a little bit softer color, be able to do some things with this. So what you are able to do, there's a bunch of customization that is available for the user interface and for your API to provide additional information. So let me go to the second sample that I have here, where we're going to start adding annotations into our API for interactions, for better interactions with OpenAPI and with that Swagger JSON file. So let me close these. I'm going to set this one as the next startup. Where'd it go? I have to stop it first. Thank you. I said stop. Thank you. All right, over here. Set as a startup project. So in this sample, I've started creating this very simple contact controller, and I've created an object called contact. And it's just got a first name, a last name, and I put some .NET documentation here, right? Unique identifier for the contact is just an ID here. And the contact's given name we'll call first name with a maximum length, and a maximum length with a required entry for their last name, and that's their family name or surname, okay? Kind of garden variety object, very simple. But I want you to see how, let me leave that contact open so we can see that. Our contact controller, once again, this is an API controller. I've added a produces attribute here to indicate that we're delivering JSON content when you interact with this API. All right, by default, we're generating JSON content. I just put a simple list in memory of, here's two people, Jeff Fritz and Mary Contrary. There they are. And I have a couple methods to get and return those contacts. And I added some .NET documentation, just some comments here, so that folks can get, right, you can get IntelliSense when you're interacting with this API, right? Right, so if I had another method somewhere else, this dot get, and I get my IntelliSense there so that folks know what this is going to be doing, right? So that's always handy to have available. I also have get by ID down here, and I added these produces response type attributes to inform folks that interact with this API that, hey, there's different ways that we're going to respond to you. And one is a 200 HTTP 200 status code. That's typically okay, right? This functioned successfully. So we return 200 OK. And I'm also returning 404 not found, right? You probably have heard the HTTP 404 status code meme. Folks will take a picture when they're assigned to hotel room 404. Oh, look, I found my hotel room, but it's not found. 404 not found, right? So in this method where I'm getting a contact by ID, well, if you tried to find a contact that isn't in the collection, right? I only have 2 contacts and their IDs 1 and 2. Well, if you try to request contact ID 5, I'm going to return a not found status code. That makes sense, and that's something that's appropriate for me as an API to indicate, well, here's what's going on. Here's the a little bit of information that a machine is able to recognize and understand better than throwing some sort of an exception at them. Return return an empty object, right? Return a not found status code that appropriately triggers and says no record was found. So, and I'm clearly returning an OK status code here for this if I find the contact in my collection. And actually, this should probably be a new OK object result so that it properly indicates that and enforces that OK status here. All right. I also added a post method here, and I added a little bit more documentation to this one. Not just add a new contact and the new contact to create, but I also defined what a sample request looks like with a little bit of documentation inside this remarks block. Once again, I have the 2 response codes, and this time, not only do I have a 201, which is the prescribed response code when something is created. I created this new contact. 201 also provides location for where you can find that that new object. So created at action result, and I'm specifying you're going to find it at this method, get by ID, inside contact controller, and here's the information that you're going to pass into the route. The ID is the new contact's ID, and here's the new contact object. So I checked to make sure, we learned about model state previously, I checked to make sure that the object is valid. If it's not, bad request. You didn't meet my required fields. Maybe your fields are too long that you sent in. Whatever, that violation of those constraints that I've defined here, right? And I'm going to return an appropriate indication for that. This is built into ASP.NET Core the way that this behaves. You just need to add this, and it will automatically do all that error checking and parameter checking for you and return that information. I'm doing a very simple, we'll just assign the next ID in the collection, right? Just context max ID, give me the highest ID number, add 1 to it, and that's our new contact ID, and add it to the contacts list. This is intended to be extremely simple, and it's clearly not good use of creating a primary key and indexing, right? Use a real database that has auto-incrementing numbers, numeric keys for something like that, or generates a GUID, whatever your situation, whatever your needs might be. But for this very simple instance, just assign an ID number. And I mentioned the created at response. So nothing extraordinary here. I've added the comments to make this very accessible to other folks that are going to be interacting with these .NET controllers, right? And once again, right, with that IntelliSense, those comments on this, right, if I say add new contact, I get this little bit of information, and if I generate documentation from this, right, I'll get all that syntax output for me inside that documentation, right? There's a number of documentation generators available for .NET. So now what does OpenAPI bring on top of this? What does Swagger do with this information when we go to load up our data, our services? So in my configure services method here that we set up, I add Swagger documentation, and I'll turn on these comments here in a second because I want you to see where they appear. But I can now add not just here's the version information, but title and version is what we start with. And we'll get into more of this in a second here. Let me show you what this looks like. I'm actually going to run this at the command line because I think it's a little bit more interesting when it runs there. How we doing there, chat room? So this will start up and we'll see. So Fritz's contact API, that was the name right here, the title that was assigned to my API, and I gave it version 1.0 here. So 1.0, V1 up here. Okay, and if I take a look at that Swagger JSON, doing good? All right. So Fritz's contact API, and there's that version 1.0. And here's information about the contact and the different responses that we're going to get from interacting with our APIs, right? So here's the definition of what a contact looks like, and it's actually easier to read this over here. So now, right, I put those constraints on. Max length flows through into my first name. Max length flows through here, and a little star to indicate this is required. All right. We also get this problem details record. That's a pretty standard element here that allows us to return an error message cleanly that is going to be easy for a machine to interpret and work with. When I look at my getContact method now, this one has no parameters, returns only application JSON, right? We lost those other data types. And we see what it looks like. If I take a look at the one that has the ID parameter, returns success and returns not found. So now we're declaring additional information about the response types that we get when we interact with these. And we get this nice user interface, formatting that. The one I really want to show that lights up is post. Post only works with, well, it works with application JSON, text JSON, application something plus JSON. And I get a bad request and my success indicator here. And if I add somebody new here, so let's try this out. I don't need to specify I need an ID, but a first name. Let's specify, I'm trying to think of a, so I'll make this Joe Bago Donuts, right? One of my favorite false characters here. And the response that comes back is, oh no, what did I, oh, wait a sec. What did I do? This was working. No route matches the supplied values. It should have posted and received. And now I feel shame. Contact controller. HTTP post. Add new contact from body. That was working. Did I forget something? Is it choking on that single quote? Nope. Broke something. What did I do wrong? What did I break? Please don't tell me this is a... I ran into a serializer issue. No, that's not it. I ran into a serializer issue on my machine the other day, and it had to do with the casing of that. The rest of this works, doesn't it? Those were working the other day. Try that out. Go get that. There we go. No, it did add them. Haha! It did add. My created at isn't string action name controller. That should have picked up. I'm gonna have to verify that and get back to it. It should have picked up that method name there. I'm not quite sure what I'm... If I do it as create, and I call this, I can specify the name of this route. If I call it this, right? I can go back down here, and I get route name, route values object. Save that and let that restart. Ah, there it goes. And I'll do this one more time. Joe Bago Donuts. Joe Six Pack, whoever it might be. There we go. Now the response body return includes, that's what I was looking for. It includes the new contact that it created, and it includes this location header to indicate here's where to go find that object you just created. All right. So not bad, but I'm just at the start here. I want to provide a little bit more documentation about myself. So if something like that error happens, I want to be able to contact Fritz. Hey, there's a problem here. You need to go fix this. So you can add contact information, a description, and licensing. And there's a couple other fields. But you can add this into the Swagger documentation. And it appears right here inside the API. When you look at the JSON file, it's also up top here. So even if you don't make the UI available, this is nice, and I can click through to those appropriate locations. But this is available for anyone to consume and interact with, right, at a machine level. So that's not bad. That gets me somewhere where I've got this a little bit more friendly. But I wrote all that cool documentation for .NET developers to use inside my code. Well, what about the folks that are interacting with and visiting this API from across the internet? They're not necessarily using .NET. They might be using something like JavaScript. So how do I pass that information along? Well, you can, with any .NET project, you can add this entry here in the project file, generate documentation file, specify true, and what it will do is it will generate some XML that you can pass along that contains all that information from the documentation that you added, all that comment documentation up in here. And this is how they generate documentation for various APIs that you see. Even on the docs.microsoft.com site, they use a little bit of this technique, generating that XML file, and then they go and format it. Well, here, I can grab that XML file and right, so I have a definition of here's what the file is. It's the name of this project. So it's going to be 2 annotations. Get that name and put .xml on the end. Go find it in our folder on disk and include those XML comments inside of our project. So, right, if I open this folder in File Explorer, and none of these things are specific to Windows. All of this works on Mac and Linux as well. You will see, there it is, 2 annotations XML, and you can already see it popping up there. It's a pretty ugly XML document that has, here are the names of the various members, the various methods inside my project, and some documentation to go with it. So by including that in my project here, when I go back over to this, now those descriptions flow through into the user interface. Not only is it in the user interface, But of course, it's in the JSON also. So other humans that may be building some other user interface, maybe they're building a Blazor application, maybe they're building some sort of a desktop application or a mobile application to interact with this API, they can grab that description and drop it directly into their user interface. Okay, that's pretty cool. But I also get now things like that sample request called out, and it looks like code being sent through to the visitors that are working with my application. Ew, what don't you like there, Flop? I don't see too many questions here today. I want to make sure you know that I'm here to answer your questions and talk through this. And of course, we'll be answering questions on the comments on the YouTube videos when it's posted over on the YouTube channel later. Please stop me, ask questions as we're going along here. I'm happy to pause. The AMA tag is on. Anything related to the APIs that we're working through, ask questions and we'll pause and make sure that we take care of that. So, all right. So, I mean, this is nice. Makes it a little bit easier to see and interact with this. And when I try it out, the rest of this still looks the same. The response codes, I now have this little bit of information coming back that appropriately tells me here's what this thing is. Oh, that joke when I mentioned JavaScript. Yeah, okay. So that's not bad, but I want to get rid of some of this other branding up here and make it look like my API, right? And I can apply CSS to this page just like I could any other web page. Let me go back to my code. Down here, when it sets up the Swagger user interface right here, not only does it say, well, here's the Swagger endpoint, the default one that we defined for this version up here, right? It generated Swagger documentation version 1, right? But I can also change the title of the document, and I can inject a style sheet here. You can also inject JavaScript. But I can low impact just inject a style sheet here, and I put a style sheet inside my www root folder here. Fritz CSS, and I want to change the top bar so it's navy instead of black, make it a little bit softer. The top bar, let's get rid of any of the links that are up there, hide those. And there's a wrapper around that logo up top. Well, I'm going to change it to the C# logo. So I got my little super C# logo up there. I'll set the size and position appropriately, all with a little bit of CSS there. And if I go back and look at, it's already built and refreshed my browser, and now I get navy background. I get my cool super C# logo there, and right, I've got my title flowing through into the API. Fritz's cool contact APIs up here. Okay, so all of these things can be changed, can be moved around, right? If your organization wants to name things whatever you'd like, if you want to push stuff around, if you want to rename things later, right? C# with C# Fritz contact API, and that'll refresh and it'll reflect the new name of this API. So notice up top, Fritz's contact API v1, that is, where'd it go? Fritz's contact API v1 is coming from here, because you may have different names for different versions of your API that you want folks to be able to interact with. Now, there's right? There's more that we're going to be able to do with that, and we're going to talk about versioning here. One more demo down here. Nifix asks, oh, come on, bring it up there. Can you disable the tryout function, the execution inside the user interface? I believe it's one of the options in when you configure the Swagger UI. Document title, doc expansion. I believe there's a way to turn that off in here. Right, you can turn on security, supported submit methods. There, enable filter, enable deep linking. I don't see it here. Config object, no. There are ways to turn on and off those features. But I don't know that off the top of my head. I'll look up that question, and I'll drop that into the description of the YouTube video. So let me follow up on that. Albatross Live asks, let me bring this up. That's a fine question. The scroll bar on the right here, how do you put that on your files? This is a Visual Studio feature, so you can kind of see a preview of what the code looks like, and I can mouse over and get a little peek into what it's showing there. If you right click on the scroll bar, you can choose scroll bar options in Visual Studio. That was hanging off the side. I'm sorry. Let me bring that over. Right click on it, now you can see it. Scroll bar options. And in here, I can turn this from bar mode to map mode. Bar mode, of course, is the regular scroll bar, right? You're used to seeing. Grab that, change it into map mode, and it'll show that little preview peek into it. I can also make it as wide or as narrow as I'd like to show as much code as possible. That makes sense for me in there. I like to make it medium, so it's not very wide there, but wide enough that it makes it easy for me to see just a little bit of code there. So, and we're going to see how Visual Studio has a couple other cool features here to help us in just a second. You're welcome, Albatross Live. So, okay. Now, this is great. I've got this wonderful definition. The little tryout screen looks nice for me. It's got my schemas here and carries through the descriptions that my .NET folks see when they work with my code, so other folks outside of my ASP.NET project can see and know how to interact, the ways that I expect them to interact with my code. But when I look at this, right, the big thing here is that Swagger JSON file. I want to be able to take this and turn it into a client. And this is where Visual Studio 2019 can really help you and automate this, because it's a menu option. It just works. Check this out. So I'm actually going to go in, and I still have the project running here in the background on the command line. I'm going to go into this other project that I started here called Client, and let me back this. Let me back out the sample here. You'll be able to see the sample. It'll be available in the source code repository. Let me comment this out. So by default, it doesn't really have too much in it. You can right click and, where is it? Add service reference. See it down here? And it will allow you to connect to an OpenAPI service. So I'll choose Add OpenAPI, yes. And I can either point to a file. So if I want to download that Swagger JSON file, I can just download that, put it somewhere on disk, point to that, and load that up. Or I can point to the URL for that, and Visual Studio will go get it for me. So I'll just paste in localhost 5001, Swagger v1, Swagger JSON. Click Finish, and it will go find all of my NuGet packages, my .NET references that I need to work with this. Download that service reference. It downloads that JSON file, puts it on disk so that I can work with it, and you see it here in the OpenAPIs. Well, when I click over there, you'll see, there it is, Swagger JSON, and there's the same file you saw in the browser, but it's here locally. Now, that means I can stand up an HTTP client, create a Swagger client that will connect, and here's the URL that that thing lives at. And I'm going to pass in my HTTP client so that now I have an OpenAPI client that I can use to work with this. Now, where the heck did Swagger client come from? And what's it doing with that thing that it downloaded, that JSON file? So you'll see here, it adds this OpenAPI reference into the project. This is a special tag that it uses to identify and say, well, we're going to generate some code, and this is where I got that file from. But based on that Swagger JSON file, I'm going to generate some code that you're going to be able to interact with. And here's those other package references that it added, Visual Studio added to my project. But Fritz, I don't work with Visual Studio. I don't do this. I work in Vim. I type fast. I eat nails and I spit rust. Okay, that's cool. We've got you covered there also. There is a tool that you can use at the command line called .NET OpenAPI. So let me stop this. So if we run .NET OpenAPI, I don't have it installed on this machine. I have it installed on my other machine, but not this machine. I can install it with a .NET tool install command, and this will be in the docs over in the GitHub repository. It goes, downloads it, and makes it available so that now I can say, because now I have it installed, .NET OpenAPI, and I can add, refresh my API from wherever it came from, or remove it, and generate all that stuff in my project file appropriately. So if you're working at the command line, if you're not in Visual Studio, we've got you covered with a command line tool that will help you interact and build those clients appropriately. Yeah, I thought I deleted Visual Studio also. Like, what? What? So that's pretty cool that I can generate and work with that code. But now that I have that installed and available here, right, there's if I look at the client that it generated, you go away for a second. I get base URL just like I would for any other HTTP client, but I've now got my methods that I would have had if I was interacting with the API through HTTP, right? I can add a new contact, and there's the documentation coming through. Add a new contact. Very small on the screen. My apologies, but I can go get all the contacts, or I can get a contact by ID. It generates these names for me so that it comes through and I can interact with it here. Okay, now we're talking. Now, right? If I delete this and let this program run here, let this little client program run, debug, start new instance. My API is sitting over here running, and here's the new instance kicking up, and it's going to connect over, make its request, and there's Jeff Fritz and Mary Contrary coming through from the API. So I've got a standard way to generate a client, interact with my server, and get the appropriate responses that I expect. You don't have to fiddle with serialization, getting fields lined up and connected together. Generate the client, and it just flows through and works. That is not the C# source generators feature. That is correct. That's a C# 9 thing. This is something that's standard that OpenAPI does. And we have a client generation tool for you to work with that. Now, Okay, that's one way to interact with the API. I can generate a client, whether it's, right, there's other tools for whether it's PHP, JavaScript, Java, Rust, Ruby, what have you. There are tools available for you to generate some source code to work with your API definition over here. Okay, but there are other ways at the command line that you can also work with your project. So we also have an HTTP REPL tool that's available so that you can do that REPL type of interaction, right? Oh good, it's already installed. So when you think about a REPL, right, that's that command line interface so that you can execute and get information back quickly. So if I execute, it's HTTP REPL, and I'm going to go to localhost 5001. I think I have to put .NET in front of it, don't I? No. What am I doing wrong? I had this working. Here's the documentation for it. It's installed. Oh, there's no hyphen. Oh, are you kidding? Get rid of that hyphen. One more time. Now I'm connected. Look at that. My prompt changes from my folder location to now my service location, and it found my OpenAPI description documentation. So when I look at this, it looks like I'm working with the contact. So I can say get contact, and it returns my contacts. I can also say get contact 1. Is it ID equals 1? I forget how to do the ID. I forget how to get with the argument. Let me go back to that documentation. So once I do a get, I thought there was a clear way to pass in the argument. No formatting, header, response headers, get, yes, yeah. Right? If I just say get 1, see, it doesn't return anything. It returned everything. No. That. Oh, do I have to CD into contact? Now get 1. Now I got it. I was up a level. So, right, I can ls and I can see here the ways that I can interact. I can get at this level, get everything, right? Get individual ones, or I can post a new object back. Now posting, let me make sure I remember how to do this one. Posting is a little bit trickier because, yeah, you may want to open an editor to interact with this, to get a text editor so that you can work with it. Okay. There's a default text editor configuration you can set up here. And some folks like to set it up for VS Code. Whatever. I would set it up for Vim, but you can do that interaction and be able to do this. Right, if I CD backup one, right, if we do get /contact/1, does that work? Yeah, there we go. Thank you. And it does the same thing. Now, I'm effectively at the command line here. You can generate scripts to pass in here and take a look at how it responds. So think about that. You could automate, write a bunch of scripts that you could drop into an integration test to make sure that this works properly. Right? That's pretty cool. That's a neat option when you think about it. Where is it? You can there is a way to pass through a script to this. I don't see. There we go. Run the script at the given path. So you can execute it with a run method, and it will execute that and return the output. So that is the HTTP REPL. I will drop that install command into chat for you, because I think that this opens up a whole world of navigating around and interacting with your code. And the fact that when you add the OpenAPI documentation on top of it, it makes these interactions very well defined, right? And clear exactly what it's doing, right? And you even saw a little bit of the documentation pop up. Issues a GET request. I thought we saw it pop up some of the documentation as well. But all of this interaction has been generated because of the APIs that it found out there to work with. So, pretty cool stuff that is available, works on Windows, Mac, and Linux. It's a command line tool you can install and use anywhere. So that's the HTTP REPL, and we generated a client. But I've been talking about V1 of all of these things floating around out here. Everything's V1 this, V1, V1, V1. Well, gosh, Fritz, what happens when I need to change my API? I need to increment the version. There's things that I need to be able to handle, right? I need to be able to change things up, and I want to provide both versions of the API, because some folks might be working with an older version, and we want to be able to do things with a newer version as well. Benny has a question out here. Let me pause and take Benny's question. Can Swagger interact with authorized endpoints? Yes, it can. Let me hold off and get it. It can. I don't have there is documentation here about how to do it, but let me come back and talk about authorization, authentication when we do our security session in about 2-3 weeks. We'll get back and we're going to talk about security and authorized APIs at that time. But it is available. There is documentation for it. Yes, you can pass tokens in the authorization headers. You can specify headers both on the HTTP REPL and in the interactions with Swagger. So yeah, there's the eShop documentation out there from Microsoft has really good samples that show how that works. But let's talk about versioning. Versioning is a little bit tricky when folks interact with their APIs, because I don't want to change things and break somebody who's currently interacting with my application. I want to provide new features, new capabilities without breaking things, right? And let folks on their own terms migrate to the new version. So in my third sample here, called, funny enough, 3 version, gee, go figure, right? I've provided 2 contact controllers. I still have my first contact controller here, and I don't even need to provide that. Let me. But I've also got a contact controller 2 that deals with a contact2 class. And contact2 not only has ID, first name, last name, but I've added a field called email. We're going to pass email addresses around and treat that as an email address, right? We have a special data annotation that validates that something's an email address. It doesn't even make sure it's a valid email address. It doesn't check and send an email. Just make sure that it's formatted like an email address. It's up to you to do that extra validation that somebody actually receives a message at that address, okay? So I've updated my contact controller. I've got a new contact controller that works with contact2 objects. And here's Jeff's email address, and here's Mary's email address. And I've updated the getById method so that it returns contact2 objects when you go to request a specific contact. There's a package you can add in, a dependency you add into your project called Microsoft ASP.NET Core MVC versioning. You add this in, and I've also added the versioning API Explorer because I still want to provide that Swagger interface, and I need to be able to traverse those version numbers to be able to show and interact with different versions of my API. For example, when you navigate through to go get information about my contact controller, you want to go to /API/contact, but for a specific version, we should put the version number in the URL. So this little template will take the version and the API version and drop it in here as a version number that we can use. And that API version is specified over here in my startup. So my default API version is an API version 1.0. So anything that isn't specified having an API version, and you saw me remove it from here, is version 1. So this controller is version 1. This controller has an attribute that says this is version 2. So now I have two different Swagger documents that I need to generate. I need to generate V1 and V2, and the version that I'm indicating on the end here so that it matches up with that API version that I declared on my controllers is 1.0 and 2.0. So I'm generating now two Swagger docs. And when my user interface loads up, I need to tell it, hey, there's two API definitions here that you can use to make that Swagger user interface to interact with. I've also added, there's a couple filters here that I've added. A couple folks have written and passed around in the community that will remove that version number from the user interface when you're working with the Swagger UI. So we're going to go back into startup. So these will simplify and make that user interface a little bit easier to work with. So let me start this version of the project so you can see just how it's changed slightly now that I've added this additional version to the project. So .NET watch run. Here it comes. And I don't have all the CSS and things flowing through on this because I wanted to focus on the API. But here's Fritz's contacts V1, and you'll see now there's two versions in the dropdown. So if I go to V2, Fritz's new contacts V2, that comes straight out of my documentation. I gave it that title. Okay. There it is. And here's my contact 2 object, and there's it has an email. It knows the difference of this. And it will behave appropriately when I try it out and give me that other information. So I can change between these, and it's interacting with those different controllers appropriately to build and work with this. Helba has a question there. Let's bring that up. Is there a way to use Swagger and ignore a route? I think there is. I'm nearly positive there is. I forget exactly what the command is to ignore a controller. I think there's an attribute or something you put on it. Hide API or method. See, look at that. It didn't even find. Hide actions from Swagger. API Explorer settings, ignore API true. So if I go back to here and let's go to my contact controller 2, right? If I say ignore API true there, come on. Let's let it rebuild. There we go. Take a look at this one. V2, and there's no operation defined now. So, really clear how you're adding just metadata to your controllers. You have one place that you're defining that interaction for right, the metadata for the entire API, right? You could push this out into another file so it doesn't live here in the startup class, right? You could turn this into a for loop here to go and generate these automatically, but you could push these out somewhere else so that these are being maintained. And right, this mentality that you're seeing from the ASP.NET Core project and project system is the things that you need in order to configure definition data and how folks interact with your controller are either metadata around the controller or these comments we're going to pick up and publish and make those available as well to interact with your APIs. So that makes it real easy. See, that .NET Watch Run is running and it automatically refreshed this for me. If I go back over to the HTTP REPL for this, right, I've still got it sitting there. It will go and detect the first JSON file. You can reconnect and have it go find the other one. So localhost 5001, OpenAPI, I'm going to Swagger, and I called it v2 swagger.json, and it didn't connect to the other one. Why didn't it connect to the... I had it connecting to the other one. Nope. I'm not sure why it's not connected. That command is supposed to connect. Base address or -- OpenAPI. Do I need to give it the full? That needs to be an S. I bet you that's what I did. Yeah, there it is. I forgot the S up front. Now I'm on the v2 API. So now you see I'm on 2.0. And now there's contact. And I can do my get for a specific, and it interacts and returns the information. So, right, my APIs, because I added that versioning into it, you see it has 2.0, right, sitting in the middle of this, right? So, and I could change that format if I wanted to. I can make that the way that version number appears. I can change that up with some of the configuration options that are available to me. Where'd it go? Actually, it's on the route, isn't it? Up here. I believe I can just put a V in front of there, and it'll format it for me. So, but let me see. I see some questions here coming through on chat. Let me take this. So, Mr. Joe B has a question here. What if my API is on top of some class library and I have different API versions? Take the example from the email address, but the controller executing some method in a separate class library. Okay. I would also need two different class libraries. Well, if you have two class libraries that are different versions, right, and you're maintaining different versions of those, you're going to have some sort of different interface sitting in front of how you work with those objects. So I like the one comment here. Yes, you can make two different services that have the same interface and point to the two different libraries appropriately. Absolutely. So how you reference and interact with those class libraries behind the scenes is up to you. Adding this little route indicator here, this flag allows you to put that version number, embed that version number directly into this so that it just formats appropriately and works. So that's a little bit about versioning. There's other techniques that you can use with API versioning, putting a query string parameter, API-version equals, and request the API version from your ASP.NET API. You can put it in as a header element and have it requested and handle that way. Those don't work well with Swagger, with OpenAPI, where we want with OpenAPI, we want our API definitions to be clearly defined in our request signature and our response signature, so that it isn't hiding behind the scenes with some extra headers that are required that you must configure a certain way. All of these things are very clearly endpoints that all the information around that version number, the request configuration, the response configuration can be cached. We'll see in the future that in a future episode how when we want to put in security information and formatting information, I mean, we already saw how you can do formatting and change the output format type, but we want to pass security information in through here. That's a header that you don't want cached along the way, right? Headers aren't going to be cached with those. So, all right, let me move on and let's talk about gRPC. So, OpenAPI, it's this open specification for how you want to work with and interact with your objects, your services. But gRPC is another implementation that does almost the exact same thing, has very similar concept, where I wanted to be able to define a service with some sort of service definition file and allow then clients to be generated based on that service definition file. So I have a forced and very clear definition of how to request and interact with that service. So we've got about a half hour left. I'm going to go through this and see how we do here. So I'm looking. API Settings Explorer hides when you set group name. What do you mean group name? So there is a template that comes with ASP.NET Core for a new gRPC project. So if we open this up and we search here, we go find gRPC. There it is, ASP.NET Core gRPC service. So the initial service looks a little bit like this. I have a program that has all the stuff to set up your ASP.NET server, because a gRPC service is just another API service sitting on top of this. Our startup class, configure services, just like we're used to seeing. This time we're adding gRPC configuration. So this defines the protocol and way that we're going to interact with this standard. Now, gRPC is defined as requiring HTTP 2, and the format of its service configuration isn't JSON. It's a format called protocol buffers. So it's not sending JSON back and forth. It forces this very tightly packed binary serialized format called protocol buffers. And there's this proto format here that defines what a service looks like. So I've imported a couple extra things here so I can work with empty and timestamp objects down below. But you specify a namespace for C#. This is something specific to .NET, an option configured for us. So for gRPC, that's the name of this project, this namespace. But this is what protocol buffer sees, is we're defining a service called greeter, and this has a simple hello, and it's going to say hello world type of thing, right? So it's a RPC. This is a method you can call, a remote procedure call, RPC. Say hello, and you send in a hello request, and it returns a hello reply. A hello request it's a message that has a single parameter called name. A hello reply is a message object that has a single parameter, message, that it's going to return. I've also added this one here. I don't think we're going to get into talking about streaming in this. I had a little bit of a problem getting this working properly. So I can make this request, and right, I've defined, well, here's the signature. I've effectively generated not a C# interface, but a protocol buffer interface that specifies that this service knows the say hello method inside of the greeter service, and it returns a reply object. Well, that I can now implement as a service over here. I'm going to hide this other sample that I'm not going to quite get to. So this here, greeter, is the name of that service, right? This matches over here, and greeter base is just a base class that's generated for me by ASP.NET Core that has that say hello method generated for me. So check that out. Right, let me put this side by side. Come here. And so, right, there's the say hello method, and I'm overriding the say hello method, and there's a hello request object with some context information that will be passed into me. But I have this request object, and I can execute whatever code I want inside of here, but I need to make sure I return that hello reply. And everything in gRPC is asynchronous by default. We want to make sure that this runs as fast as possible, because when we're on an HTTP2 supported server, we get multiplexing. We get the ability to have multiple threads from one request being handled at the same time. All right, now we're talking. Okay, now you're speaking my language. Performance, speed. Okay, now this proto file that's over here, there must be something being done with it, that it's generating these that hello request object turns into a hello request C# object. So this proto file is included in the project right here. It's a protobuf type object. Specify where we're grabbing it from, and we're generating server types of services from this, because we're going to create client services later. When this project is compiled, what happens is it will generate, let me close up the version there. It will generate behind the scenes C# files for us for that proto definition. So check this out. Under obj, you always wonder what these bin and obj folders are out here. Yeah, wait till you see this. Right, here's references to all of the packages that are referenced in my project, but under debug.NET 5, here's some of that middle code that's being generated for us. So under protos, there's my two C# objects. Okay, so I can open this up and take a look at, let's do an edit on that, right? So I've got a little bit of a class here that's going and handling all the interactions with the server, and parsing and handling the various concerns for my objects that I've defined. I have here, where'd it go? Right, here's my hello request object. It implements an interface and of type hello request, and it has my properties here, right, for name that I can interact with. Now in protocol buffers, I have to assign a number to it. I need to assign a position to that, right? And it's 1 here, because when it serializes these, just like JSON or XML, there's some sort of annotation that says, well, here's where that field lives in the data transport, and it's at position 1. When it's binary serialized, it's at position 1 in the file. So no, it's not a foreign language. This is system generated, and it's purposely using some namespaces and things that don't collide with how you're interacting with. So all of this is highly optimized, and it's generated for you so that you don't have to interact with it. You just implement the signature, the contents of that, and all that goo for interacting with protocol buffers and handling the request and formatting it properly and interacting with the server, all maintained for you behind the scenes, so that you can get away with just writing say hello, right? I could bring over my contact objects and drop them into this project and be able to interact with contacts in much the same way, right? So let's add a new folder here. I'll call this models. Actually, I don't even want to, I'm going to come in from the protocol buffer. Right, so if I go back to the proto here, where I'm defining it this way, right, I can say RPC get contact by ID, and I'm going to send in a contact by ID object, and it's going to return a contact. Let's call this a contact response, right? So I need to define these objects. So let's just add here a message, and we'll call this contact by ID. Look at that, it knows what it is, right? And I'm going to receive an int32 that is the ID that I'm requesting, position 1 that I'm receiving. You could receive a bunch of other objects that you want to work with there, but right, other parameters, it works the same way. Just increment the number on the side. So I'm gonna return a contact response. Now the contact response has an ID, a first name, and a last name. So int32 ID equals 1, string first name equals 2, string last name equals 3. So there's my contact response. There's my get contact by ID. If I go back over to greeter service now, Visual Studio has already parsed that proto file for me behind the scenes, and now when I say override, I now get contact by ID that I can create and interact with. So if I had my collection of contacts available out here that I wanted to work with, just like I had in my previous sample, so I will go grab the contact object here, right? Now, I could copy this and reuse it, right? And provide some way to transition copy between my response type and my data storage type. For the purposes of this, I'm gonna pass on that. I'm just gonna grab my list of 2 contacts so I don't have to type them in again. Right? Come here. Open that back up. Why isn't that opening? There it is. Let me grab these, right? And I will just stash that here. And instead, this is a contact response. Contact response. There we go. Okay. And these fields are named the same, so it just works. So now over here, real easy, right? I can just say return contacts, first or default, and I can say c.id equals request. Give me some space there. ID. All right. From results. There we go. Cool. Peter, let's stay on topic here for the discussion. So now I should be able to execute and interact with this and get contacts back, right? This is now an object that I can work with and fetch data and do things with inside my code. It knows what all these things are. So let's generate a client for this. Just like we did with OpenAPI, there's a tool available for you to, inside of Visual Studio, for you to work with this. So let me remove this and walk through the process of adding it. So I am going to go through and over here, add. You saw it when I went into service reference earlier. So add service reference, and I'm going to point to my gRPC location. I can either specify a file on disk or point to a URL. If there's a URL out there somewhere that has a service that you want to interact with, you can just specify that URL here and get that data. But I'm just going to point to that location on disk because it's real easy for me to see it here, grab it, reference it. I'm generating a client class out of this because I want to be able to interact with it. It adds the packages and the references appropriately for me to be able to work with that. And it put down that proto file inside my project, right? There's the reference. I can put this reference into my project if I was working outside of Visual Studio. It's real easy. It's just a block of text. It's referenced and shows up in my Solution Explorer there. And I can write now my program to create what we call a gRPC channel, specify how I want to reach out and interact with that. Yeah, that's what I thought. And I can fetch and work with that capabilities from that service that we've defined. So let me go start up the service. Back over here, close this, and I will go into over here, and yeah, let's .NET run this one. So now here's my service starting up. There we go. So I'm going to connect to localhost 5001. That's where this service listens. It's gRPC. I must connect with HTTP 2. It automatically created this greeter service definition, right? From my proto definition over here. Service definition is called greeter. And it actually lives in this for gRPC namespace. Check this out. Over here, right? I'll get rid of the using statement just so you can see it, right? Doesn't know what this is, but it's the for gRPC namespace, the same place that it was defined inside my server. So you may want to be wary of that when you specify a namespace for working with a gRPC service, right? Every client is going to get that same namespace when they grab that protobuf. So I'm creating a client here, and it's right. It generates that name. You pass in the channel, right? The channel that you're connecting through. Where is it you're connecting? And at that point, you get the methods that were defined on this. Get contact by ID. It also generates a contact by ID async method. Say hello and say hello async, so you can interact with those appropriately for whatever your system's needs are. So if I start with this one, say hello async, right? It'll make that asynchronous request over to my application. That's not the right startup project. I want to start the client project. Here we go. So it will reach into my little service application that is running I'm not sure. There it goes. There it is. It already returned hello Fritz. And if we look at the server, you'll see it executed the say hello endpoint, and it logs that it made this request here. Okay, so let me move on and take a look at that other method where I want to get a contact. So back over here, right? I already closed that out. So let's change this. Now, you know what? Let's say var contact equals await client. Now I'll say get client by ID async. And I'm going to send in a new contact by ID object. And there it was. ID equals, give me ID 1. And I'm going to get back, if we look at the contact object, it's a contact response object. So console write line, contact with ID 1. Yeah, let's do it like that. And we'll say contact dot, and there's all my properties, right? First name, last name, ID, and a couple other helper methods for working with this. So first name, and I will add contact dot last name, and it'll write that out for me, right? Kind of makes sense that it's making this request to the server, fetching that data, and there it is, contact with ID 1, and there it is. So, this makes it very, very simple for me to declare and interact with my server by generating a client. 1 second. Okay, so we have here, right, very clear way to interact. We've generated client code that folks can use and interact back and forth with my application, and it feels to me as a .NET developer exactly like I'm working with .NET code, and that gRPC protocol for interacting with my server, for making that communication, just falls away behind the scenes. It's not something that I need to be overly concerned about, because it's been hidden, and I've been provided this shim that allows me to think and work like a .NET developer and still get all the benefits of gRPC. So let me go to this question here, this comment from Chaotic Good Boy. Let me bring that up. And ColdFire, yes, we need to talk about that. So this is something I could use to let logged in admins know when there's an updated status on something, like new work item completed by. gRPC can be used bidirectionally. You can push information, both you can set up a browser as a client. You can also have a browser listen on a connection and stream information to them. You can do that. WebSockets feels like the better choice technology for this. gRPC can be, like I said, can be done in both directions, but I think you're going to find WebSockets, and when we talk about SignalR next week, I think you're going to find that that's a much more compelling tool for the scenario you're describing. ColdFire mentions here, gRPC feels like modern WCF. Exactly. So WCF, for those of you who aren't familiar with that, WCF is the Windows Communication Foundation. Windows Communication Foundation. It was a series of frameworks that you could use that you could generically connect to and interact with between Windows machines using .NET Framework. How it would binary serialize data and send things back and forth, and the API endpoints you could configure to do remote procedure calls like we're doing here. You could send it through queues. You could send through SOAP services if you wanted to do SOAP service formatting, but that's a technology that's kind of fallen by the wayside in favor of OpenAPI. So these are things that WCF was very, very good at, but some of those technologies are very Windows only, and folks have moved on and moved into these open standards that behave a little bit better, have better performance, and have richer capabilities. So to get folks into and kind of force it as a forcing function, get into get away from WCF and being stuck with Windows-only types of interactions. When you want to reach across the web and you want to interact with things on the cloud and other mobile devices and the like, gRPC will work regardless of the operating system, regardless of the network that you're working on, because it's HTTP2. That means transport layer security is baked in. You've got that SSL certificate managing and ensuring that things are secure end to end. So I agree, gRPC does feel like modern WCF. It is something that we encourage folks to migrate to if they want to still take advantage of some of those technologies from WCF. They're not comparable. Oh, I'm sorry, that's a different discussion. Flot, yes. SOAP was a technology that a lot of folks didn't like. I'm not sure why they didn't like it. The generators for generating SOAP messages, SOAP, and SOAP was the simple object access protocol. There were a lot of technologies that would generate the definition messages and generate and manage your communication back and forth, just like we're doing with gRPC and OpenAPI. It's just we're using a format that isn't XML. Okay, that's fine. That's something that folks can enjoy and work with. GraphQL subscriptions. Okay, you can use GraphQL subscriptions, and that doesn't work with gRPC, does it? I don't think so. So, and there's a question here from Hop in the Cloud, leaning in towards gRPC. Well, what about gRPC and SignalR? So we're going to talk about SignalR next week. SignalR is, and to kind of give a little bit of insight, SignalR is a technology that's used, it's an abstraction layer over live interactions between a client machine and a server machine. So you have a connection that happens, and it will step down connections from the most current fastest technology, which right now is WebSockets, through server-sent events, something called forever frame, or even long polling, to make sure that messages are sent to clients as they happen on the server. And you can send messages the other way also. It's a two-way communication. You can send messages from the client to the server very quickly and easily with a defined API surface. So, GraphQL subscriptions can run over SignalR gRPC. Okay, so yeah, you're about 3 steps down on this. So, SignalR is this live connection, where gRPC, streaming will do a little bit of this, but that's functioning over HTTP. It's keeping a longer connection open for the stream to send messages back and forth. But gRPC really is, I'm making a request and I'm receiving a response, multiple responses, or I'm opening a request and sending multiple requests and receiving one response. And there's ways to configure and interact with streaming messages back and forth using gRPC. But it's a little bit further down, not something I wanted to get into, and I'll leave it as an exercise for you to investigate and go a little bit further on. So, but next time we'll talk about SignalR, and we'll get into some, we'll do some fun demos where we'll make things appear on your machine, and we'll receive and put things on screen from wherever you might be. But I think that's all I wanted to cover today. So these samples, everything that I went through here today, this will be available over in the GitHub repository. I will merge it in. I'll add a little bit more documentation into the README and post it up here, as well as loading up a message, the message appropriately with the description for the YouTube channel a little bit later. But I think that's all we're going to do today. All right, let me head back over and let's wrap this up. So today we learned and we talked about two different technologies that you can use to augment your ASP.NET Core APIs. When you want to expose an API, some interaction that you want a machine to connect into and do something with some data, process some information, and take further actions on that interaction, you can set up and use either OpenAPI, work with some Swagger definition files, you can work with gRPC, and you can also pass around those protobuf definitions to make it easier for folks to see exactly how your APIs work. We saw the .NET OpenAPI command line tool that'll help you point to and generate OpenAPI definitions inside your project. And we also saw the HTTP REPL tool today that allows you to script, connect to, and work at the command line with APIs, no browser needed. Really great stuff, and I hope you check that out. I hope you find those useful. All of those links you'll find in the YouTube video. If you're watching over on YouTube, you'll find it in the description area just below the video here. Links out to the GitHub repository, links to those tools, installation instructions, and links to the questions that were asked along the way here today. Very cool. Thank you so much, friends. Appreciate you joining me here today. And for those of you watching on YouTube, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.